Hi, I'm Rob, N1NUG. Today, I want to show you how I mounted a ham radio antenna on my 2024 Subaru Outback. Now this is actually going to be my second attempt at mounting an antenna. You may actually be able to see behind me, I've already got one on there. I'm not happy with that though, and let me show you why. What you're looking at is a diamond K400 lip mount that's on the back metal of the hood here. And this is a Comet SBB5 antenna. Actually, at first glance, this looks probably pretty good to most of you. But take a look at this. I flexed the antenna at the top to simulate kind of going down the road and wind resistance. And you could probably see this thing is rocking back and forth quite a bit. And that's not a fault of the mount, it's actually the metal of the hood. This thing is all aluminum, so it's not as stiff as steel would be. Now, it's on here sturdy, it's not going to come off, but I'm afraid that over time, this is just going to rock back and forth like this and fatigue the metal on the hood back here. So I don't think I want to leave this like this. I think I'm going to mount this a different way. Now, before we get into revising this mounting system, let me actually show you what my first thought was for mounting the antenna on this car and why that didn't work either. When I first started thinking about how to mount an antenna on this car, I thought that right here above the taillight would be a good spot. I could get the edge mount and clamp it here. However, when I started looking this car over in more detail, I realized that this piece right here is plastic. This is all plastic trim all the way over. And this poses a couple of problems. The first being that the mount won't have a good metal surface to bond to. Now the antenna I've chosen doesn't actually require a ground plane, so it would probably work okay electrically. The other problem it poses though is the fact that the way this is made on the inside doesn't allow room for me to get in there and tighten up these set screws. So then I thought maybe I could mount this on the hatch. It is all metal from the taillight down after all. However, this tab right here interferes with the bumper extension when I try to close the hatch. So I'm not going to be able to mount it there. Running the coax into the car is also a little bit more difficult back here than it is up in front of the car. So here's a look at the brackets that I'm going to use to mount my antennas. These are ditch light brackets from Anderson Design and Fabrication, made specifically for the 2020 to 2024 Subaru Outback. These are designed to mount to the bottom of the hood hinges through these slots right here. And then this part is designed to extend beyond the back edge of the hood into the cowl area, and then I can mount my antennas to this hole here, which is normally designed to accept a ditch light or a fog light. The brackets are made from 1/8 inch thick steel and are heavily powder coated with sort of a textured finish. Now I'm not so sure if it showed up in the camera or not, but there's a few little rash marks on these brackets already, and that's not from the factory. I dropped these twice trying to take them out of the package, so I may touch that up before I put these on the car, but they did come pristine from Anderson. The hole in these brackets that's intended to accept the fog lights, it's just a little bit too small to accept the stud on my NMO mount. So I'm going to have to drill these out just a little bit bigger to be able to mount this through here. I haven't measured it exactly, but this hole is just a little bit less than 3/8 inch in diameter. And I think 3/8 is what I need to fit my NMO mount through that hole. So I'm going to drill it out to 3/8, and then it should accept this stud. So with the hole opened up to 3/8, the stud for the NMO mount fits in here. But the hole still isn't quite big enough. What I've come to realize is that there is a little bit of a shoulder at the bottom of that stud. And when I measure the diameter of that, it's closer to 1/2 inch. Now you can see what's happening is that with the hole at 3/8, the stud goes through, but the bottom of the mount is sort of sitting on that shoulder, and the very bottom that's designed to kind of grab into the paint, or in this case powder coating, isn't going to make contact with the metal. So what I think I need to do is open these holes up just a little bit bigger to 1/2 inch so that this thing will sit flush on the bottom of the bracket. With the holes opened up to 1/2 inch, the shoulder now goes through the hole and the bottom of the NMO mount now sits flush on the bottom of the bracket. Now I'm ready to mount the brackets on the car. I'm going to orient these so that the ADF logo is readable, and the flat part of the bracket is facing the side of the hinge here. So in other words, it's going to slip over the bolts just like this. So now I'm going to grab a 12mm socket and I'm going to loosen and remove the two nuts that hold the hood to the hinge bracket. Now I'm going to want to make sure I keep one hand on the hood, because once these are loose, it's going to want to tend to kind of pop out and fall down. And obviously we don't want that to happen. Now that the nuts are removed, I can bring the bracket up in place and then reinstall them. Now I can move to the other side and do that one. So here's what the bracket looks like mounted to the car. Now I just need to get my antenna wire installed. I should be able to route the coax through a gap that exists between the outer part of the hinge and the upper part of the fender right through here. If we look inside the door jamb, you can see this space here. Now that I've got the coax running down through the door jamb, the plan is to run it through this grommet where the wires go through into the door. So in order to do that, I've pulled off the kick plate and this piece of trim so that I can access the backside where these wires come through. So now what I want to do is use this sharp tool to poke a hole in the grommet. Now when I do this, I obviously want to be real careful that I don't poke any wires or anything that I shouldn't. So I'm just going to go real slow and kind of feel around and make sure I've got the right spot. Once I find the right spot in the grommet and start pushing on it with the tool, you can see the rubber kind of bubble out. And that's how I'll know I'm in the right spot. Now I should be able to just push the tool through to make the hole. There's actually sort of a rasp on the shank of the tool. And I'm able to kind of slide that back and forth a little bit to kind of open that hole up so it's big enough to accept my coax connector. So to get this through the grommet, I've got it taped and wrapped around a piece of 14 gauge solid copper wire that I poked through the hole that I made. Now I should be able to pull this through and get the wire into the car. Now that the wire is through the grommet, I'm going to go through and make sure that everything is in a good spot here so it doesn't get pinched by the door when it opens and closes. In fact, the more that I look at this, the more I think I probably should have routed it behind the hinge here, but it's got enough tension on it here it shouldn't move. Same thing under the hood. I want to make sure that the wire comes up and routes so that it doesn't get pinched by the hood hinge. In fact, you can see I've got it zip tied right to this so that when things kind of move around in here, it doesn't get caught underneath the hinge. And now here's what things look like with the NMO mount in. Now admittedly, this is actually the NMO mount from the Super Gainer that was already in the car, but this will be okay for temporary use, and it'll give us a good idea of how the antenna is going to sit on here and whether or not it's going to be stable. Let's do the shake test and see how it goes. You can see that the bracket itself is kind of shaking a bit as the antenna moves, but it's no longer stressing the metal of the hood. Now, about the only thing mechanically that's maybe a little bit off is the fact that the antenna is not perfectly perpendicular to the ground. It's actually canted forward just a tiny, tiny bit. And I think that's intentional because of the way the brackets are made for ditch lights. They're intended to kind of point that light just a little bit sort of forward and down. And that's how the antenna is canted right now. But again, it's not a lot, just a slight amount. So it's really not going to affect anything. Just to be sure, let's get a nano VNA on this thing and check it out electrically and make sure it's tuned up right. So there's a look at the curve for 2 meters. You can see it's best right around the top of the band at 148 megahertz with an SWR of about 1.09. If I scroll down to 144.5, which is close to the input frequency for my club's repeater and about the lowest frequency I'm going to ever use, you can see the SWR is about 1.55. Now I'd rather see that curve centered a little bit more in the band rather than up at the top side of 2 meters, but the antenna is not adjustable, and this is actually pretty decent, so I think we're going to be in good shape. Looking at 70 centimeters, it looks like the best SWR is found right around 444.800 megahertz or so. If we look at the bottom of the band, around 420 megahertz, we're actually getting an SWR of about 1.9. And if I go up to the top part of the band at 450 megahertz, it looks like we're around 1.4. Work pretty well. That mostly takes care of the antenna, but now I need to install a radio in this car. If you want to see that, check this video up here.